From poor attempt selections to navigation errors, all the way to absurd federation decisions, there have been some very questionable choices made in powerlifting in 2025. These, in my opinion, are the worst fumbles of the year. Thank you again to Avances for sponsoring these videos. I'll be giving away the next $50 gift code at the end of this video, link in the description. They'll be restocking just about now when you're watching this video, 20th of December. Follow those instructions, you can go into the running to win the next one. Okay, starting off with the most light-hearted one, Russ's navigation was the first big fumble that I'll be going through. So, in APFs, he was competing in to make his 93 kilo debut, which was held in the Cayman Islands in Georgetown in North America, being the North American Championships. Located roughly there on the world map. Russ, however, managed to fly to Georgetown in Guyana instead, which, for those of you who are keen geography nerds, you might notice that Guyana is not only an entirely different country, but an entirely different continent. It's actually in South America. So he went to South America for the North American Championships, which is pretty damn funny. There is Guyana on the map, which, to be fair, they're actually not that far apart. It's just, you know, one's sort of the tip of South America, the other one is like barely in North America. But all is well that ends well, because Russ, even though he flew to the wrong country initially, managed to get there in time and still broke the IPF world record with 9:18 to complete what I deemed the comeback of the year in my previous video. So yeah, all's well that ends well. Not the worst mistake in the world. Next up, onto some attempt selections. Tiffany Chapon at Worlds. Now, what I will say about this is I don't think this was as bad as people make it out to be. I'm putting in the video because if you hear poor attempt selection, you're probably going to think of Tiff, because a lot was made about her attempt selection at Worlds. I think it was somewhat overstated, but I'll go through it anyway and give you my thoughts on it. So this was a second attempt squat of 162.5, which moved slow, but didn't move all that terribly. Her PB score coming in was 165.5, which was her own world record. So on her third attempt, she attempted to chip her world record and go 166, which unfortunately was just too much on the day and wasn't quite able to stand up with it. Now, based on his second attempt of 162.5, it was hard. Another 3.5 kilos, a half kilo PB to chip over her own world record. I think that was a relatively reasonable call. I mean, if they would have gone maybe 165 to play it slightly safer, if she would have got that, they would have been kicking themselves for not loading the extra kilo, probably. So this, I don't think, was too bad. The one that was admittedly a bit worse, and the one that I guess most people sort of say was poor worlds or poor attempt selection, was on her bench press. So she took 102 for a world record on her second attempt, and she got it pretty damn smoothly there. That was half a kilo over her own world record, which was the most she had done in the 47 kilo class. She had done 105 previously, weighing in above 47 at another meet that she had done not all that long before Worlds. She jumped up an extra 3 kilos to 105 on her third bench press, didn't elect to take a chip. They just went straight, Team France just went straight to the next round number in 105, didn't put 105.5, 104.5 for a chip, which was an interesting choice. And to load an extra 3 kilos was also an interesting choice, because she was nowhere near it on that day, as you can see there. Couldn't even budge off the chest. So, I mean, fair enough that 102 didn't move terribly. Maybe they would have thought extra 3 kilos was there. But even if she would have got that, she didn't take a chip, which, for those that don't know, taking a chip is good, because then Heather, who she was against that day, would have had to load the next 2.5 kilo increment and above to beat Tiff, right? So yeah, the fact that I didn't take a chip was a bit of a curious choice, and it was just way too much on the day. And she ended up paying for those mistakes come deadlifts and the final standings, where she ended up losing her first ever defeat, losing to Heather Connor in one of the biggest upsets of the year, which I've covered already in multiple Liftmas videos, so I won't delve too much into it. She still finished on 434.5, which was still above the world record, although half a kilo below what Heather ended up doing and leaving the world record at. And the reason why I think a lot of people, like, if you look at the attempts just like that, it doesn't seem all that bad. Like, she, you know, pushed pretty heavy on her second attempt, as the French do, and then loaded an extra couple of kilos on her third attempts to try and squeeze every kilo of herself that she could. And in doing so, she missed her third attempt squat and bench press. However, her seconds were pretty close to where she was at that day. But a lot of people say this was real bad because Heather's final deadlift was a real struggle and real borderline. She ended up getting it. I think it was a good call, but it was like literally an extra half kilo or an extra kilo probably would have been the difference there, and that's from Heather herself saying that too, or something along those lines. So if Tiff would have just taken maybe a smaller increment on that third bench or on that third squat, it could have made the difference. However, I don't think this is the worst attempt selection off this year, even though it's the most, I guess, famous one, or the most publicized one. I think the worst attempt selection this year was Joseph McDonald at Worlds, and specifically his deadlift. This is one that I think is way worse than Tiff's, but not a lot of people talk about. So on his second deadlift, he pulled 352.5 to lock up a 945 total. And you can see there, didn't move too bad. It was started to get a bit sticky and a bit slow at lockout, but he stood up with it still pretty smoothly. He was having a great day. He had made all his I think he missed his third bench actually, but regardless, he had been having a great day. And that lift put him, after the second round of deadlifts were complete, that put him in 4th position, not all that far off, only 7.5 kilos below the lead. And he also had bodyweight advantage over both Nonso and Etienne, and I believe Dev as well. So it was literally 7.5 kilos off of top place, and he wasn't the biggest deadlifter. So, I mean, he ended up attempting a heavier deadlift than Dev and Mo, which I'll talk about in a second, but Nonso and Etienne were without a doubt the biggest deadlifters off this flight, being the 2 former world record, or Nonso was the active world record holder, Etienne was the previous one, and he now actually reclaimed it at Asians. Etienne did with his 401 deadlift, but Nonso and Etienne definitely the 2 biggest pullers in 120 kilo RPF history by the numbers. So that you knew they were going to pull after him. But Joseph McDonald in this position, all he would have had to do was load an extra 7.5 to put himself into provincial first, and at the very least force a podium, or force Nonso and Etienne's hand to see if they can pull for the win above him. But instead, on his third deadlift, he takes a massive 32.5 kilo jump for 385 to attempt 977.5, and he can't quite get it. Now, to be fair, he got a lot closer than I thought he would. I could not believe he came out for 385, which was way above what he would have needed to pull into provincial first. Like 977.5 was way above the 952.5 that everyone else was on at that point in time. In fact, this is where it would have put him. So at this point, he was taking this third attempt after Dev and Mo had already missed their thirds. So Mo and Dev were already out of the race. I mean, Mo's third was a bit of a controversial miss, which I covered in my one of my previous robberies videos. But he only had Nonso and Etienne to pull after him. So remember, he was on 945. So really, he could have loaded an extra 7.5 kilos to pull himself into provincial first and finish worst case bronze medal, right? Or if he wanted to load a bit more, he could have pulled a number that was still well within his capabilities that forced Nonso and Etienne to load up and still pull for the win, and add a few extra kilos to that. Now, granted, he probably thought Nonso was good for 400 plus and potentially Etienne as well, but in these situations, you got to put yourself in the position and ask the question of them, right? If you miss a lift, then it doesn't matter what they're going to pull or what they're capable of pulling that day, because you haven't forced them to do so because you've missed the lift. But yeah, 977.5 was way above what he would have needed. And that 385 was crazy. His best deadlift coming in was 366.5. So he was going for an almost 20 kilo PB. I was following his training before this, and his training was going amazingly well. But his deadlifts, I don't think I saw him deadlift more than maybe 370, 360, 370, or somewhere in that range. So there was nothing suggesting that he had a 385, especially after how his second attempt moved. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't a 32.5 kilo jump, sort of looking deadlift, in my opinion. I think it was good for 10, 15 more, which really is probably all he would have needed. 17.5 actually would have been the number. He actually got a lot closer than I thought he would, to be fair. He got it to above his knees and got it to just that point there, almost mid-thigh, right before the bar dipped, and obviously that turned into a no lift straight away. But I can't help but think that if he would have just loaded a more strategic number, he could have guaranteed a podium and perhaps even a win, because Nonso ended up missing his final deadlift, so he ended his down 952.5. Etienne got his final deadlift of 962.5. So that's how it ended, and obviously Joseph McDonald fell off a podium into 4th place, courtesy of his second deadlift and the total that gave him of 945. So he finished in 4th. Still an amazing performance, still an absolute breakout performance from him. and still, put himself on the map. And I still named him as one of my breakthrough stars of the year. And he went on to win Junior Worlds as well, just a few weeks or a few months after Worlds. But man, if he just would have loaded up a safe number, in fact, all he would have needed to win was 370. Now, I know this is in hindsight, and I know it's all well and good to say this after Nonso and Etienne have completed their deadlifts and knowing what they ended up doing on that day. It's all well and good, right? But again, you got to think with Bobb and presumably Rondell coming back to Worlds next year, and the likes of Joshua Ngoka, Nonso, Etienne continuing to level up. I mean, Joseph McDonald is right there with that pack too, but you just got to think, when is he going to get a better chance to podium at Worlds? He may never get a better chance than this to podium at Worlds. He could have loaded an extra 5.5 kilos on his deadlift and pulled like sub 360 and got it. Or if he would have loaded 370, that still would have been a PB for him by a few kilos, and it still would have put him into provincial first, and it would have got him the win. Now, Etienne probably would have loaded more if that was the case and potentially got it, but his 390 deadlift wasn't super easy either, right? He was looking like that was the limit for him on that day. So if Joseph McDonald pulled into that, or pulled 370, Etienne could well have missed. He could have well have forced Etienne to overextend, and he could have ended up on first. But regardless, he should have at least podiumed, man. If he had just taken a number, like, you just know that if this was Team GB or Team USA coaching him, they 100% would have loaded a safer, lower number to guarantee him podium. He would have very easily guaranteed himself at least a medal, which would have ended up being silver based on Etienne being the only one to make his third deadlift, or potentially gold if he had loaded sort of something beyond or 370 or somewhere in that range, which based on his 385, he probably would have got. Like, take 15 kilos off that pull, I think he's standing up with it, right? Probably a limit lift where he probably gets it. And imagine if Joseph McDonald would have won Worlds. Talk about an upset. That would have taken it for sure. I mean, he was a dark horse coming in, but no one thought it would be in with a chance to win the whole thing. With better attempt selection, he very well could have. Okay, next up, Bobb Matthews, and his fumble this year, in my opinion, was the withdrawals. So we're moving on from the attempt selection sort of fails or poor decisions onto Bobb and his decision to withdraw from every single meet this year bar one. Now look, I will start off by saying Bobb, I guess you would say, had a good year or he had a good performance, I'll say that. I'll show you what his year could have been, but he had a great performance at SBD Austin. It literally went perfect. He went 9 for 9, grinded out his lifts, crossed into the 1,000 kilos, totaled 10.5, half a kilo more than what Rondell totaled this year. So he leaves 2025 having posted up the biggest 120 total ahead of even Rondell, despite them not meeting face to face, winning SBD Austin, an absolutely stacked meet. So the meet that he did do went pretty much perfectly. Not pretty much, he did go perfectly. However, all the meets he could have done. Sheffield. So Bobb Matthews was the world champion in 2024 in the 120s, so he got invited to Sheffield. He could have gone. He ended up withdrawing from Sheffield because he said that initially he said he was going to do it as a 105. Then he said that, you know what, he doesn't want to cut to 105, wants to keep bulking up through 120 to try and prioritize that Rondell matchup, which didn't end up coming this year, unfortunately, hopefully next year. And he also didn't like the way it was treated by SBD and Sheffield by being put in the background of a poster or whatever the case was. But I'm going to make the case that even if Bobb had competed at Sheffield as a 120, he still would have had a great chance to do very well in podium. Those were the standings at Sheffield. Obviously, Shell won it by heaps. Bobb's best total coming into this year was 978.5 that he did at PA Nats last year. So if we just give him his 978.5, or actually gave him 979 because 978.5 happens to be the IPF world record, so there's no way he would have just matched it. Let's just say he would have chipped the IPF world record by half a kilo, which would have been a half kilo total PB for him as well. 979 as a 120, that would have put him in 6th place in Sheffield. Not bad, not, top 5 or podium, but still not bad, breaking the world record at Sheffield, earning a bit of a cash prize, right? However, if he wanted to finish in 3rd, based on how the numbers ended up with the podium and the percentage you see there, he would have needed 994 in the 120s to finish on podium at Sheffield, and only an extra 2.5 kilos to finish in silver medal position. Now, based on the 10.5 he did at SBD Austin, And based on the fact he was 978.5 all the way back in, April or March of 2024 PNAT, I think he could have done that. I think he was capable of 1,000. I mean, it was January this year, the very start of the year, when we saw him put up his, the 1020 gym total, I think it was, or 1025. And then obviously 1010.5 is what he did at SPD Austin, which was quite a push towards the end of this year. But I don't think it was unrealistic that he could have totaled 1,000 or at the very least high 900s at Sheffield, and that would have put him in silver medal position. Now, in order to win and come first, he would have needed 1039.5, which there's no way he would have got. So fair enough, he wouldn't have been able to challenge Shell. But even if he went as a 120, he still had a very good chance of making podium. And this isn't even mentioning what he could have done if he had quickly just cut to 105 and competed as a 105. Because the world record of 940.5, he could have blown that up and he could have been a serious challenger to Shell to win Sheffield, right? But I know he didn't want to, sort of mess with his bulk to 120. He didn't want to go back to 105. Fair enough. I just made the case that he very well could have podiumed even in the 120s at Sheffield. PNATS was the next one. So he didn't go to Sheffield, which meant he didn't auto qualify to Worlds. So we all assumed that the next time we would see Bobb would be at PNATS. Then it ended up being the case that he dropped out of PNATS after Rondell announced he'll be competing as a guest lifter. So that was the first time where we thought we were going to get the matchup this year, only for it to just be taken away from us. Bobb ended up not doing PNATS for reasons that is still not super clear to me. I don't know exactly why he didn't do it. He could have won with ease. I mean, you can see the totals there. 945.5 is what Dev won it with. Jaden Edwards actually popped afterwards, so even he wasn't in the mix ultimately in the end. But yeah, like I said, 978.5 was what Bobb won PNATS with the previous year. 970 is what he won Worlds with the previous year, so he very easily would have walked away as the PNATS champion, in my opinion. And we could have seen the matchup against Rondell, and potentially could have been, well, not potentially, probably would have been close, given Rondell totaled 1010.5. Now, he probably would have taken a different attempt on his final deadlift and not taken a huge 40 kilo jump to pull that 412.5. So he probably could have totaled way more and definitely would still likely have won. But still, we would have seen the first chapter in the Rondell v Bobb saga, which would have been very cool. But yeah, that would have been a second straight national title for Bobb, which would have qualified him to Worlds. And as I just said, just described with Justin McDonald, this is what the podium and the top 8 look like at Worlds. And like I said, 970 is what Bobb won Worlds with in 2024. And based on what we saw at SPD Austin, he's definitely obviously got stronger than that. So I think he quite easily would have won Worlds this year as well for his second straight world title. Then World Games, again, given the fact he won Worlds in 2024, he qualified to World Games. He would have been in the super heavyweight category as a 120. And this is what the top 7 look like in super heavyweights in Raw Powerlifting at the World Games. Teamer ended up pulling up the somewhat surprise win. 110.93 GL points was the winning GL points. That's how the meet was scored. All Bobb would have needed was a 922.5 total, and that's assuming he would have weighed in at World Games at the exact same as what he weighed in at SPD Austin, which he likely would have weighed lighter because we know he's been continuously bulking. So he weighed in at 110.7 at SPD Austin. He probably would have been a few kilos lighter, which means he would have needed even less than that. So literally a low 900s total would have won Bobb World Games based on how the GL points shook up. Now, obviously we all know Bobb, he would probably open with low 900. Well, it actually takes pretty big jumps, so he wouldn't quite open with it. But that is a very comfortable total, and I'm very confident in saying Bobb would have been the World Games champion. So, all of those accolades, Bobb could very easily have won this year. I know he had an amazing SPD Austin performance, and you might say that it was all worth it, he went according to plan, but in my opinion, he could have very easily podiumed at Sheffield if he went as a 120 to not disturb his bulk, or challenged for Shell's gold medal if he went as a 105. He very easily, in my opinion, would have won PNATS, slightly less easily, but still comfortably would have won Worlds, and very, very easily would have won World Games. And that would have put him in contention for Powerlifter of the Year. And, you know, who knows when he's next going to get a chance to do this next year with the 120s and Rondell presumably coming back. I don't know, man. To me, this was quite the fumble this year. Bobb, as great a performance as he had, I can't help but feel he could have left 2025 with so much more. Speaking of withdrawals, though, my next fumble is all the people that withdrawed from World Games. So I'll quickly go through the list. Jesus Alvarez, Bob Matthews, Tony Cliff, Ashton Ruska, Emil Krastev, Brandon Petrie, Russel Orhii, Austin Perkins, Tim Monagatti, Panatarianides, and Waska Carpio were all of the men that withdrew from World Games. All the ones in bold were the world champions from 2024. So literally 5 out of the 8 world champions 5 out of 8 world champions chose not to go to World Games and withdrew for a whole host of reasons. Some more legit than others, like some were injured, some just had kids, and didn't want to travel. But then it seemed like with each withdrawal, the next one became more and more, I guess, easy or justifiable for that lifter. And at first it was big news that, this lifter's not at World Games. And then with each one, eventually just became like, another lifter's not there. Oh, great. People just withdrew. And for a lot of these lifters, I don't even know ultimately what the reason was. Now, granted, lifters can do what they like, right? They don't have to compete. That's completely fine. I just think it was a missed opportunity given how big the storyline was in 2024 that, this is the qualifying year for World Games. Make sure they podium at Worlds. This is an extra storyline that's going to change people's attempt selections at Worlds. And a big deal was made of it the first time World Games was going raw. And then all of a sudden when it happens, the majority of the best lifters in the world all withdraw from it. It just, kind of didn't really sit right. From the women, similar thing, but not as bad. Alexis Jones, Amanda Lawrence, Agatha Shitko, which, to be fair, that wasn't her fault. I'll talk more about that in a second. Crane Warford, Leah Bavois, Meg Scanlon, and Jess Espinal. And those 3 were world champions from 2024. So 3 out of the 8 world champions from the women's side didn't elect to go, which means, combined with the men and women, half the world champions from 2024 did not go to World Games. And ultimately, I think World Games was pretty good. Like the stream and everything, quality wise, and how they had it set up looked amazing. There were a few things that could have been better, like the commentary, like the camera angles, like the fact that they didn't have much scoreboards happening. But overall, I think it looked very professional, aside from those sort of points there. And I think it was good. It would have been even better to get powerlifting on the map if actually the best raw lifters in the world were there. Unfortunately, they just weren't. No disrespect to the lifters that were, but the majority of them weren't the best in the world, right? Because all these lifters didn't go. So I think that was a shame, and especially with the long-term goal of powerlifting to get into the Olympics, which I can't believe I live in a world where freaking skateboarding and breakdancing are Olympic sports over powerlifting. Seriously, come on now. I mean, no disrespect to any breakdancers watching this video, fun little hobby, but seriously, really? Yeah, powerlifting deserves to be in the Olympics, and World Games would have been a step in that direction. Unfortunately, with the best lifters in the world not going there, I don't think it necessarily helped with that direction. Okay, on to the Federation decisions. Now, I know you're probably expecting me to trash on the USAPL at this point in time. USAPL actually didn't make any bad decisions this year. Now, granted, that's because they're still suffering the consequences from their terrible decision a few years ago to fracture the sport, and they're completely irrelevant. But still, they haven't been on the map this year, so I'm not actually going to trash talk the USAPL in this video. I'm going to direct that trash talk to some other federations that are worthy of it. The first one being the Trinidad and Tobago Powerlifting Federation, TTPF, and their Nationals date selection. Now, you all know this relates to Rondell Hunt. I'm going to quickly go through the history, just very, very quickly and briefly. I did a full video on this. I'll leave a link to the description if you want more details. But essentially what happened in 2018 through 2022, Trinidad and Tobago Fed had some issues and they were no longer recognized as an IPF affiliate for those 4 years. Obviously, Rondell, being the junior world champion in the IPF in 2018, suffered tremendously because he couldn't compete in those 4 years, had no route to the IPF. In those 4 years, though, he trained and got stronger, bulked up to the 120s. So he decided in 2022 through 2023 to compete in the USAPL, which at that point in time had split off from the IPF, where he put up some huge performances, culminating in his now famous 10:45 at 2023 Raw Nationals, where he lifted as a guest lifter. Then in 2023 onwards, everyone realized that they should not have gone USAPL, and IPF was the way to go. Again, Rondell had no choice but to go to USAPL because he had no IPF route available to him. But he wanted to go back and compete at Sheffield, given that he was like 100 kilos stronger than every other 120 alive in terms of total. And IPF banned him for 17 months via Article 14 because he was competing under USAPL, which was non-WADA compliant. So he had gone from competing in the IPF 2018 Junior Worlds to a non-WADA compliant Fed in the USAPL at that point in time. So yeah, he got a random 17-month ban from the IPF. Terrible decision from the IPF, and yeah, IPF sucks just as much as USAPL when it comes to the Rondell situation. Then in 2025, TTPF is back as an IPF affiliate and they finally have national championships again, which means lifters are finally able to go, Trinidad lifters are finally able to go to Worlds again. Now, Rondell's ban went through till February of 2025, given that he competed in September for Raw Nationals in 2023. So his ban would have ended in February, and the Trinidad and Tobago Fed decide to hold their national championships on the 25th and 26th of January, a few days before Rondell's ban was up. Great job, guys. You just alienated the biggest potentially star of the sport and potentially the strongest guy ever from competing for another full year by a few days. They couldn't have slid it by a few days. Come on, what reason could they possibly have given? Oh, that's when they were. I don't give a shit. I don't care when they always hold it. It's Rondell Hunt, for Christ's sakes. He's finally able to compete, and you can't push your nationals back by a week? Absolutely disgusting. So yeah, the significance of this decision was Rondell couldn't compete in nationals, which meant he couldn't qualify to Worlds in 2025, which meant he couldn't qualify to Sheffield in 2026, effectively extending his ban by another year unnecessarily. And now we can't see Rondell back in action until 2026 when he has to do nationals, Worlds. But yeah, if they would have just slid their nationals by a few days to accommodate for Rondell, which, like I said, if you have an athlete like Rondell, you hold your nationals on the 31st of December or the 1st of January if you have to. I don't care, right? If I'm the Trinidad Fed, I'm ringing up Rondell and saying, hey, when works for you? Cool, we'll work around that. Literally, like that's what you have to do when you have a generational athlete like Rondell. All this, political federation crap is just terrible for the sport, and there's more coming up with my next fumble, unfortunately. But yeah, next year Rondell is back, but man, if we went for the Trinidad Fed scheduling, they could have pushed it. And we could have had Rondell back this year. Imagine how cool it would have been to see Rondell at Worlds this year. Imagine how cool it would have been to see Rondell at Sheffield, in this coming Sheffield that's, just a few weeks away now. The Trinidad Fed is to blame for this one. But speaking of terrible federation decisions, this was something else. PZKFiTS, aka the Polish IPF affiliate, which is how I'm going to refer to them from now on, the Polish Fed, because the consonant to vowel ratio in that abbreviation is just diabolical. But the Polish Fed banned the GOAT of women's powerlifting and perhaps tested powerlifting overall in Agata Shitko. So again, I'll go through this relatively quickly because I know it's been discussed a lot in the powerlifting community. So I don't want to repeat what too many people have said here, but essentially in July, Agata was obviously set to compete at World Games. She dropped this video with her coach, and apparently the Polish Fed had dropped or declined Agata's coach's paperwork to compete at World Games. So they decided he wasn't needed in the Polish coaching staff for World Games for reasons that were not clear to either of them, and apparently they weren't informed of that either. They only found out through other people, which kind of sucked. Then Agata, on account of that decision, decided to withdraw from World Games, given that she didn't want to compete without her longtime coach. She had had bad experiences with the other Polish coaches, and she just didn't want to go fly halfway across the world and compete with them, as opposed to her everyday coach who had guided her to world titles, Sheffield victories, and all that. So fair enough, she makes that decision. The Polish Fed ask her why. She explains. They basically say, we believe there's adequate coaching representation with the Team Poland coaches we're bringing to World Games, so we are revoking your license for deciding to not compete. Now, them revoking Agata's license meant that she can't compete in any IPF competitions, given that if she would have to represent Poland, and to do so, she would have to have a license through this Polish Fed. So that means she couldn't go to basically any meet, including potentially or very likely the upcoming Sheffield. I believe they appealed it, and around November, the decision came in that she would receive a 1-year suspension. And from what I've heard, I'm not 100% sure on this, but from what I've heard, it's not even backdated to July. So it's literally from November, which means that she's going to be out for the next powerlifting year, which is a terrible decision by every metric possible. Just the worst decision you can make. Agata is a full-time professional powerlifter. This is how she makes her living and earns her money. Not from coaching, not from influencing, but literally from competing and from lifting. That's how she earns her money. and they're taking that away from her for over a year. Not only that, but she's the greatest talent that the sport has ever seen on the women's side, and like I said, arguably even the men's side as well. She's got the highest gel points ever, just straight up the greatest female powerlifter of all time, and one of the greatest of all time, period. And we're not going to see her for a year, and that extends obviously out to Sheffield, the coming Sheffield, which they haven't officially announced she won't be in it yet, so I think there's still hope, and I'm hopeful that they reverse this, or IPF steps in and reverses it somehow. But if she doesn't compete at Sheffield, that would suck, because she's the 2-time defending Sheffield champion, so she has a chance to win her 3rd straight Sheffield title, which she would be the favorite for, because she would go as a 76, which is actually a lower world record total than her 69 world record that she won Sheffield with this year. So yeah, I mean, we're missing out the chance from seeing an absolute generational lifter, similar to what happened with Rondell Hunt. Hopefully this doesn't drag out for as long, and like I said, hopefully the IPF step in and are able to overturn this, because this is a horrific decision. I don't know the politics of the Polish Fed and how they're able to have that much control over their athletes, but yeah, this is just disgusting again. The winner is, I'm not even going to pretend there's another one, PZKFiTS, or the Polish Fed, however the hell you say that. Absolutely the worst fumble of the powerlifting year in 2025. Nothing else comes close. I mean, the Trinidad Fed's national day selection was pretty bad too, but in terms of everything else, like attempt selections and, you know, Bobb's decision to not compete, like all that stuff, pales in comparison to this. I mean, banning Agatha Shitko literally is the worst thing that you can do for the sport. Like, this is USAPL level bad. I mean, you know what? I'm actually going to give USAPL a burn here and say this is actually worse than what the USAPL did, right? Or at the very least on this. Oh, actually, no, I'm going to take that back. USAPL also, what they did was pretty damn bad, but it's almost as bad as what the USAPL did. I'm not letting off the hook that easy. So yeah, PZKFiTS now joins the list of federations that are on my blacklist and forever will remain so. Okay, so I ended that video on a bit of a negative note, but on a more positive note, the winner of the next giveaway for the $50 Avances gift code is I Love Noel 4. Agree, it's definitely Russ. Yep, Russ had an absolute legendary comeback. But well done, dude. All you have to do is send me an email to presspowerlifting@gmail.com and I will send you your gift code.